The opinions expressed on the following audio program are solely those of the host and the guests. Burner Podcast is an independently produced, not-for-profit show and is not associated with the Burning Man organization or its subsidiaries. The views expressed are not representative of the entire Burning Man community and are presented here for entertainment purposes only. In short, calm the fuck down. It's just a podcast.
Hey, this is episode number 60, and it is 82 days till the man burns as of this recording. Hey, shout out to Emily Koch, I believe that's how you say Emily's last name. Emily met Amber Rose, who served as our executive producer for our DJ show, Burner Podcast Presents Alkaline. They met last year at Symbiosis, and she tuned into the show, and she was a big fan of the God in Drag episode. So really happy that episode resonated with you, Emily, and hope to see you on the playa. And we appreciate the kind words that you sent us. Man, I'll be honest. I'm having a bit of a rough time right now with the gloom in San Diego. If you're not from San Diego, it's like we have something here called a May gray and the June gloom. You know, like the rest of the year, it's basically either early spring or late spring. But this one time a year, we have to pay for our perfect weather. And somehow it's like lined up with like summer season, which is, you know, I don't know if that's irony. I don't know if I'm familiar enough with the word. But anyway, and I'm sure those of you listening from places like Chicago or Seattle, anywhere in the Northeast are going like, oh, boo fucking who, Arash. You have a little bit of marine lair in the sunny goddamn Southern California and you're complaining. Yeah, I know. I feel like I was bragging about our weather on a very recent episode intro, so now I'm kind of paying for it. But seriously though, it's like a little, you know, wah like the sun is gone, but I'm usually pretty high energy, and like the minute some clouds show up, I fall into this slump. I don't know if that's seasonal affective disorder or whatever it is, but what's not helping is that I'm going to be taking a little trip coming this weekend and partaking in my first ayahuasca ceremony. So if you know anything about how that works, it means that I can't drink any alcohol, I can't consume caffeine, or have sex for the week leading up to the ceremony. And it's gloomy weather, and I'm like losing focus, and I just like kind of feeling dumpy, and really all I want is some fucking coffee and like a glass of wine at night and some snuggle time, and I can't have any of those. So anyway, shoot me if I ever decide to become a monk. I'm a complete goddamn weenie when it comes to stuff like this. So today's episode features the return, speaking of ayahuasca, the return of Dr. Thomas Kingsley Brown. It wouldn't be the lamest idea if you were to just go ahead and press stop on this episode right now and go back to listen to episode number 20 of this show so that you can get to know Kingsley a little better and learn all the things about ibogaine, iboga. Fucking hell, I can never remember which one it is. Well, here's the super short version of what you need to know about ibogaine. The quickest way that I've used to describe ibogaine is that it's kind of like the African equivalent to ayahuasca. There are multiple clinics around the world that administer ibogaine to those suffering from meth and heroin addiction primarily. It's like a 10-ish hour journey. I could be totally wrong about that. Depends on how many doses you're taking. And it helps addicts break out of the cycle. Kingsley has been conducting research on addicts who have gone through the ibogaine treatment for MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. Oh, and if you want to hear firsthand account of heroin addiction and about an aftercare sober facility that focused specifically on those who've undergone ibogaine treatment, check out episode number 51 of this show, where I chat with Charles Johnson about all that stuff I just said in the first half of this very long sentence. So if we're going to we're going to go ahead and pick up where we last left off with Kingsley on episode number 20 of the show and talk about his having just returned from the MAPS conference in Oakland, California. We'll also be chatting about his trip to Canada, where he got to geek out with other giants in the field of psychedelic research. So, you're going to hear by the way, you're going to hear some cats in the background. At one point, they decided to just go ahead and start practicing for the cat opera they've been planning to perform for us in the near future. Seriously, one of the cats that lives in my home, Ralphie, he just like fucking walks around narrating his own life. Like just all day long. It's meow, 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 I'm gonna walk to the couch and meow, 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 like all day long. It's really hilarious. So like whenever I'm recording, I'm like, God, I hope Ralphie just shuts up. Anyway, today's episode is entitled The Rising Tide. It's a super dramatic name, and I swear it's going to make sense to you when you get into like the final third of this conversation. I go by Mr. Arash, even though nobody calls me Mr. Welcome to Burner Podcast.
On the first part of the journey, I was looking at all the life. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rain. The first thing I met was the fly with the balls and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no name.
Yeah, that was cool. It was only like 1,000 people. It was a lot smaller.
I'd love to go there.
Yeah. What is that? Is that Second Life?
Second Life?
Are you in Second Life?
No, this is just, I guess the background is my browser, but this is just a preview photo thing.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, I brought this as sort of some props, because I've had these photos from the conference.
Yeah.
And strangely, I haven't posted anything on Facebook.
Yeah.
Except that, I said there was a link to the MAPS had started putting the conference videos up, and I put a link to them online before mine even appeared.
Is a video of you? Is a video of your talk on there?
It is now. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
It's been for maybe less than 2 weeks, but I would check every several days, and it's like, okay, it's not up yet, but yeah, I put that link up on Facebook, but I haven't posted any of the pictures that I thought I'm going to come back and I'm going to post all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm going to post that my paper's been published, and and it just actually appeared in the journal online on Friday, and MAPS is paid for open access, so it's available publicly, and they pay thousands of dollars to make it public.
I want to break all that down. So just clarification for listeners who are not familiar. So first of all, welcome back.
Thank you.
to the show.
Yeah.
You were like one of our earlier guests.
Oh, yeah.
And, we talked, every time I say it, I think I say it wrong, and then somebody clarifies me, and I feel like I say the opposite version, and they clarify me. Iboga versus ibogaine.
Yes.
Iboga is the plant.
That's correct.
Ibogaine is the brew.
Ibogaine is actually it's one of the alkaloids that's present, and they're concentrated mostly in the bark of the root, so the root bark, it's one of I think it's a dozen different alkaloids that they've identified in the root bark. Okay. So yeah,
and if listeners want more information about that, they can go back to the old episode. So let's just assume everybody knows what ibogaine is.
All right.
Even if it's not me.
Okay.
So before we even get to the conference, like the last time that we spoke, that I wanted to get you back on, you'd like had a trip to Canada.
Oh yeah,
and
that
had, like,
was
a few adventures there.
Man, that was like of an adventure. Yeah, it was this Wonderland sort of thing.
Tell us about that. How did the trip come about?
Well, I don't know if I mentioned in the other podcast, in that interview I had with you, but for the past 3 years or so, I've known this woman named Annie Ortiz, who she contacted MAPS about, 3.5 years ago, and wanted to find somebody who would be willing to and able to run an ibogaine outcome study, followed by 5-MeO-DMT, or more specifically the toad venom from the Sonoran Desert toad.
What do you mean? The study followed by, or like people doing both?
People doing both.
Oh.
And actually, so she had been working at the time at Crossroads Treatment Center in TJ, in Tijuana.
So this would be, okay, so Crossroads is one of the treatment centers, one of like 17 in the world.
It's actually over 30 at this point.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there might be 15 or 20 in Mexico alone at this point. So about half from it. So she was working there, and she had introduced...
Has she already? I'm sorry. So has she already been doing this? Doing the iboga treatment and then 5-MeO-DMT?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. She's as far as I know, she's the first person who started this practice of following ibogaine treatment with the toad venom, with toad medicine.
And would you be able to articulate the difference between the DMT that most people are familiar with versus 5-MeO?
Well, chemically, they're extremely similar. I think the 5-MeO is only different by having this. The MAO stands for methoxy, so there's a methoxy functional group. The other one is N-NDMT, and that one, I don't have the exact chemical structure in my head, but so they're very close chemically. They're both very short acting, and they're both very well. They can both be very visual, but the
short acting meaning like usually
short
about
acting
10
like
minutes.
on the order of 10 minutes. Yeah. And they're both they come on exceptionally quickly when you inhale them, and so it's you go from both of them are you go from in your ordinary reality to suddenly within moments you're in some other reality, or everything's just completely shifted. So what most people know of as DMT, the N-NDMT, is exceptionally visual, and people experience these machine worlds, or they experience encounters with other beings, and it's a visual. It's just stunning in its visual effects. But the toad venom, I've only had that. Well, I've only had both of them once or twice, but the toad venom didn't have that same sort of visually stunning imagery, but it definitely transported me to a different realm, and instantly, and visually, it was just this big white field. I experienced that as this membrane. That was the only thing separating me from having an ego and complete ego dissolution. So that they're both extraordinarily profound and in different ways. But
I had a friend describe something he'd read somewhere, which is like, with DMT you meet God, with 5-MeO-DMT you become God.
Then that's pretty apt.
It's an interesting description. Yeah. So I'm sorry, Susie Ortiz was her name?
Annie Ortiz.
Annie Ortiz.
Yeah,
okay.
Annie Ortiz, who's originally from Hermosillo, Mexico, which is in the Sonoran Desert. It's in the state of Sonora, and so she grew up where this toad is endemic, and she contacted MAPS, say 3.5 years ago, and they said, "Oh, you should talk with this guy." And so she emailed me, and then shortly thereafter we met. She came up across the border. We met at UCSD, and she and I have been corresponding and occasionally meeting up with each other since that time. And we keep thinking we're going to do a study or two together. And there are things brewing there. But in the meantime, we will see each other at conferences and so on, and she'll tell me, oh, there's this great conference. I went to one in Wisconsin in January, she told me about.
And she's a researcher herself?
She is, and she's working in a lab. I think it's Chuck Raison's lab at Madison, University of Wisconsin. And she'll be starting her a doctoral program in the fall at that university. So at some point, I think we're going to be working on a study together, and hopefully multiple studies. But she's the one who was responsible for getting me on this Canada trip. Yeah. She's really intrepid, and she's totally fearless. She'll contact people out of the blue. She, like Rick Strassman. I don't know if you know this name, but he's.
I know everybody. Who is he for the listeners?
DMT, right? So. He wrote, and I'm not recalling, you might recall the name of the book that he wrote that was about DMT research.
Okay.
But he's at University of New Mexico, I think. Is that right? Or Arizona. But anyway, she'll just contact people like Rick Strassman and say, hi, I'm interested in doing research with this. Yeah. Can we talk about this? Or Ralph Metzner, or, and...
the God molecule, the soul molecule, something like that.
Oh yeah,
was that him?
Rick Strassman's book, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't think it's that. And it's not cracking open the head. That's Pinchback, right?
Right.
So
okay.
But anyway,
Rick Strassman,
like
big DMT
these
guy.
giants in psychedelics, right? And she'll just contact them with completely no fear. And I think in part, and also her integrity is totally solid, and she knows where she's going, and she has this kind of laser beam focus on where she's headed. Right. And I think largely because of those things, she's really well connected, even though she hasn't been doing this for all that long. Right. So she contacted me last year and said, hey, I'm going to be going on this trip to Cortez Island in British Columbia. Do you want to go? Oh, are you kidding me? She's going to meet Andrew Weil, who's at the University of Arizona, and also
what is Andrew Weil's specialty?
So Andrew Weil, he's been working on and writing about psychedelics since the late '60s. He wrote a book called The Natural Mind about how you can reach states of consciousness that are accessible through psychedelics, through other means as well. He also wrote a book called The Marriage of the Sun and the Moon, which is a favorite of mine, where he talks about different psychoactive substances. And anything ranging, there are 3 chapters on mushrooms. There are chapters on cannabis. There's a chapter on mangoes. He took this trip from down into Mexico and into Central America, following the season as the mangoes were ripening. It might have been the other direction.
Yeah.
And he would get the mangoes just as they were hitting their peak ripeness. And the description makes you want to eat a mango, because he talks about how he goes into this state of bliss, of
really?
Mango. Yeah.
Never thought mangoes.
What's that?
Never thought about mangoes.
Yeah, I think the pioneering stuff, and I mean, some of the pioneering stuff he's done a lot of great stuff. But I think his writing about and thinking about different means to access altered states of consciousness in ways that we wouldn't ordinarily think of altered states of consciousness. Like, when you eat something, even if it's not something that we consider to be psychoactive, it's going to change your mental state. It's going to change your state of consciousness. And he's talking about eating chilies, like really hot chilies. You've ever had some really hot food and you go into this different state of consciousness from it.
Yeah.
So
and his focus specifically like consuming, though, eating. I would argue that like watching a movie is a psychedelic experience.
That could be too, right?
You're taking on the emotions of characters that are not real. They're on a screen.
Oh yeah. So that's changing your consciousness too. Yeah. So he's really talking about things that you ingest, whether it's eating it or smoking or.
Interesting.
But he also runs there's a center, I don't know the name of it exactly, but it's something like the Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona. And so he's an MD and brings in a lot of different disciplinary approaches in his studies of things. So he's fantastic. So she said, we're going to meet Andrew Weil, we're going to meet Paul Stamets, we're going to meet, and Paul Stamets is the world's foremost mycologist, and he lives on Cortez Island, and now it's funny, I'm forgetting the name of the guy who I ended up not being able to meet, but he should be on the tip of my tongue. He's an anthropologist, Wade Davis. Yeah.
The author of The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Yes. He lives up there as well.
Who I interviewed years ago for another podcast.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So
is he a burner?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. Paul Stamets is, though.
Okay.
Yeah. So I first met him at Burning Man. Right. Another story. But yeah, so I said, yes, of course I'm going to do this. And the way she was going to go was being flown in a private jet. So the guy who, I don't even know how much, I should probably be very cautious here.
Sure.
But she was flown in a private jet by the guy who owns a company in Wisconsin, and who's very interested in psychedelics research and is funding psychedelics research. And he was the co-pilot on the plane. And so it was Annie, pilot, co-pilot, and Annie's friend, Rossamy. So the four of them flew out from Madison, and I met them in near Vancouver. So I flew up there to meet them. And then I got on board the plane to go to Vancouver Island, and then we took a couple of ferries over to Cortez Island, and in fact did get to meet these people. I missed Wade Davis because I foolishly missed my first flight, and I had to take a late flight out, so I missed their dinner with the Davises. But,
I know when we interviewed, I co-interviewed him with my creative partner on Crappy Awesome. It's the other show that I host. It's mostly in the independent hip hop scene, but every once in a while we'll bring in somebody. And back then we used to get a lot more like guests that were completely out of the realm of hip hop, like Wade Davis. This is years ago. Huh. And Wade Davis was one of the very few phone interviews I've ever done. And that's why I don't do phone interviews. Because it was basically, the interview consisted of him speaking and being Wade Davis, and just like he's an intellectual giant. And my partner and I sitting there trying to chime in every once in a while so we can remind the listeners that we're still on the show. He's just like telling story after story, and his wife was like a photographer and a model. I forget how he had met her on some crazy adventure. He's got a fascinating fucking life. But I'm sorry. So continue.
So I missed a chance to see him, but I did get to go to Paul Stamets' house on Cortez Island, and that's where Andy Weil was also. And they were having a mycological society meeting there, and so there were a lot of really interesting people at this house. And the house itself is something. It's I think he calls it. He says it's not just a house. It's a galactic launch point. It's a launch point to galactic center or something like that. He's got this compass rose in the middle of the I guess you'd call it the living room, which has a huge bay picture window out onto the ocean. Wow. And the whole thing is set in these hexagonal shapes because he's got two real loves. One is mushrooms, and the other one is bees. And so all these hexagons, and he also made the thing like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. So the main room is like the Starship Enterprise bridge. Oh wow! So you're looking out over the ocean from this crazy hexagonal room that's set up like the bridge of the Starship. Anyway, so he hosted this meeting, and that's where I met Andrew Weil as well, and really Annie helped set this whole thing up. One of the funny things to me in my mind was having them refer to her. I think it was Paul Stamets who referred to her as the Toad Woman. So she's the Toad Woman now, and it was just totally appropriate. I think she probably is
totally.
Yeah. So I think she's probably more. I think she probably is the leading expert right now on the Sonoran Desert toad, and
Oh wow.
yeah, she's doing great work. She's doing great work.
Yeah. So how long were you out there?
Just like 3-4 days.
Yeah.
We stayed at this great house, this old house.
It must have been just like a lot of geeking out.
It was a lot of geeking
scientists,
out, and it was like, fantastic. It was like pioneer hippie, and the island itself is gorgeous, and the water, the ocean water there it's protected from waves by Vancouver Island.
Right.
And so it's this still water, and it's warm. It's like, it's warm enough that, it's getting a guy like me, I can get in there, and it's like not cold at all.
Yeah. I always wondered, because like I've had, full disclosure, I mean, the listeners of this, if you're a regular listener of this show, that I'm, I don't know how to describe it. I'm definitely down like the woo-woo track. Like I do see it as a spiritual experience, but then I don't see that science is at all in contrast to that. I think that they're a dance. I think they're different languages of looking at the same kinds of experiences that we're having.
Yeah.
And I always wonder in some of these gatherings when you're dealing with people who've dedicated their entire lives to researching the psychedelic experience through the lens and utilizing the tools of the scientific method. Mm-hmm. I wonder, like, when these guys talk about it, do they see or feel it from a spiritual angle, or are they dissecting it very much from a very mathematical vector kind of approach?
I think it's first and foremost, they're seeing it from a spiritual perspective, and they might not put it in those terms, but when you get people together who are working on those kinds of things, then they don't feel any reservations about saying what their perspectives are. So they're really good at talking in the scientific language and doing those kinds of mathematical dissections of things and putting it in a scientific language. But I think it's really coming from this the spiritual interests, and that's where their love and their energy is coming from, and that's where they're also interpreting a lot of the things that they see in other in non-scientific ways, but they have to be able to translate that and put it into some kind of measurable or at least understandable language, and that's accessible not only to people who have experienced these things, but to people who haven't experienced them, and to help legitimize those things. So
absolutely, it's like I've had conversations, like a very close friend of mine just recently, like a couple of them had their very first DMT trips, and and I've seen this multiple times with different people that have taken the journey, is that before they do, they keep asking, like, oh, is it like this? Is it like mushrooms? Is it like, no, it's not like any of those things. You have no frame of reference. And then every once in a while, I'll interact with somebody who has had the experience, has had that kind of like peak level 10 psychedelic experience like DMT, and they come back from it, and they still see it as very much like just another drug trip, which is always like very mind-blowing to me, because again, like to me and a lot of people that I guess the people in my social circles, we tend to see it very much as a spiritual experience, but we're doing what you're describing. It's kind of like the spirituality is the fuel in the vehicle, even though we're still driving the car. We still need to put the fuel in it in order to drive, in order to pick a destination. And so it's always been interesting to me, like, in these gatherings, like, do you have, I would imagine there's like somebody in there that is like, no, we're just going to talk about science. We're not going to.
I don't think there really isn't. And that's one of I hadn't really thought about it, but the more I get to know people,
they don't see it as a clashing thing, science and spirituality.
Yeah, and they would, for the most part, and I'm thinking about the smartest people I've come to know. I mean, like Paul Stamets, Dennis McKenna, who, they will entertain ideas that kind of, Muggle scientists would think were just ridiculous, like plant intelligence. How are plants communicating with us? And is there something going on that's beyond just the mere biochemical interactions. Right.
Right.
I heard Dennis McKenna talking about this at a conference last year, and and if you're talking to someone more casually, you can get a lot more than that, and that they'll say in a prepared conference talk.
Right.
And so I think the people who are exploring these psychedelics and who are coming from that spiritually driven perspective, like that analogy, by the way, and the fuel for the drive.
That's honestly, that's so refreshing is not the word. That's so validating to hear that. I mean, it's just even earlier today, I was having a conversation with my brother about starting a business, and he's got a lot more hanging on the line than I do. I mean, I'm an artist. I'm single. I don't have kids. Yeah, and he's the total opposite, and he's trying to provide for his family. And one of these things that I'm sort of telling him is that we could find the perfect money-making vehicle, but if you don't love it, like if you're not feeling the emotional, spiritual drive to do it, you're not going to stick with it. And I feel like that might be the same thing. Like in order to get to the level that these guys that you're describing get to, you have to have some sort of fuel that keeps you going. That's not just, I'm going to write the next research paper.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think then the psychedelics have, I think these people are probably very open-minded to begin with, and that's part of why they started exploring things like psychedelics. But having had these experiences, obviously infinitely varied experiences, but I think what they've done is they've grown their openness to different perspectives and different ideas. So you can entertain ideas like, well, what are those machine elves in there? Is there some consciousness that I'm interacting with?
Right. Because ultimately, imagination is more important than, I don't know, intelligence, knowledge, information.
What's the Einstein quote? Imagination is more important than knowledge.
I think so. Something like that. Yeah. So during this time period, are you at this point still actively working on the iboga research?
I'm not, and actually that's what
at the time that you were in Canada.
Oh, when I was in Canada, yes, and actually, boy, the writing up of the study, the ibogaine outcome study, took so long, that was still, I think by that time I'd already been working with Ken Alper, who is my co-author on the paper. He's a psychiatrist at NYU. But I worked with him for 1.5 years on the paper, and that was after I'd been kind of floundering with it and working with some people at MAPS and just feeling like I didn't really know how to finish it up and how to just really take control of the thing. And then I had a conversation with Ken Alper. He just said basically, okay, let's do this thing. But even from then, it was 1.5 years. So I was about a half a year in when I went on that trip to Canada. And so,
how did you meet Ken?
Ken, I actually met him at a conference, Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance in Vancouver in 2012. Oh, wow. But he was somebody I knew about because I started the research on the ibogaine study in 2010, and before that I started doing some other research at one of the clinics in Mexico.
I'm sorry, the ibogaine, tell me what the name of the conference was?
The Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance Conference. So it's GITA, Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance.
How many people at this conference?
A few hundred.
Wow.
Yeah. And from 6 continents.
That's amazing.
Oh yeah. It really is.
Here's a thing that, like, if I describe to, for example, my brother, I have a feeling if I tried to explain this to him, he'd just like shut down. He wouldn't want to hear it. Oh yeah. Like you're talking about taking a drug, what? And there is a movement around the world that sees the value in this thing that's a Schedule 1 substance. That's phenomenal. Okay.
Yeah. So I met Ken first. By the time I met him, that was in November of 2012. I'd been doing I actually finished the data gathering for the study. And I knew his name because he's probably written more than anybody else has on ibogaine and iboga. He's done research. He's done some clinical work as a psychiatrist, but he's also written histories of ibogaine treatment, and so I was very fortunate to be able to, to meet him for the first thing. And if I hadn't met him at the Vancouver conference, I probably wouldn't have felt as comfortable just contacting him. I had this question that my friend Kristen asked me, and about follow-ups to ibogaine treatment, and I thought, I don't know the answer to that for sure, but I know who would, and be Ken Alper. So I emailed him, and he said, call me. So he answers the question in like 15 seconds, and he's like, so what's up? Oh, I'm working on this article, and I kind of feel stuck. Well, let's work on it together. Yeah. So
awesome.
Just like that, I get the guy who's...
It's always helpful, no matter what field you're in, to have somebody who's not like knee-deep in the thing you've been doing, to kind of be able to look at it from a different angle.
Yeah.
Help you kind of structure it. That's awesome.
Somebody with a really, with a great publication record as well, and he knows how to deal with the reviewers. He knows how journals work and everything. So the ultimate. So for our listeners who are not super familiar with sort of like how that academic process works, and by listeners I'm referring to myself. So the goal is to get published in a journal which opens up for peer review. Yes.
And because ultimately what you want is peer review, so that they can duplicate the test and further solidify this knowledge. You
want to have the peer review. You want to have your study be replicable, but you want, on top of that, you want to have the peer review, because what that does is it legitimizes your work in the scientific realm.
Yeah.
So I could just print out my study online, or I could just publish it myself, right? But without the stamp of approval from these peers who know as much about it as anybody else might, unless they say, yes, this study was well done, and we agree that you reach the conclusions that you're suggesting. Yes, we agree that that's legitimate, and we give the stamp of approval. So that's what really makes it something that can be in a scientific journal, is that stamp of approval right there.
Fascinating.
So, and that was a bigger hurdle than I thought it would be. Although Ken had told me from the beginning, it's very hard to get any ibogaine paper published, and there are a number of reasons for that. But we have. Can
you name one or two?
There's definitely a knee-jerk bias, and
because it's being
a schedule. It's a psychedelic. It has a psychoactivity. It's a Schedule I substance, and there are known to be deaths in close proximity to ibogaine treatment, and so.
Does the same bias exist like for like DMT or psilocybin?
I imagine so, but there's an additional stigma with the ibogaine, and it's partly. I think it really comes out of a couple things. One is, and what the fallback kind of excuse is that people will tell you is, that's dangerous. It can cause deaths. Well, heroin can kill you. Right. So if you can stop using heroin by using this psychedelic 1 or 2 times, then wouldn't that be a good trade-off? Right. So that's what people will say is, it's dangerous. And it's, really, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
No, that's okay.
Why
the bias exists, and if the same bias exists for like DMT or psilocybin?
Okay. Yeah. So what one of the things that Ken has done is he's written about what he calls the ibogaine medical subculture, and since the 80s, but especially starting in the early 90s, these different treatment centers started appearing in different parts of the world, and some underground treatment, people doing it in hotels and so on. And even on people who work with psychedelics, if they're MDs, they might have. I've had conversations with people who just said, this is a bunch of people who are playing doctor and who don't know what they're doing. They're killing people, and they're starting these clinics without having any real expertise, and so there's that idea of the idea of it being kind of the Wild West, and they're out there with bone saws trying to fix people up.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah,
there's some fear about that, because there was. Are you familiar with Graham Hancock?
Yeah.
So I mean, there was the talk that he had with TEDx, I believe, that the TED Central office had removed from their website.
Yeah.
And I imagine, at the time that happened, it was probably for similar reasons. Like, it was still sort of this Wild West thing as far as ideas go. Now, I imagine if people talk about DMT and ayahuasca now on TED, I feel like it's probably not as big a deal.
Yeah. And so, but I think there's even more of there's even a kind of deeper level of hidden bias there that people won't admit as readily, which is, it's easy to say, okay, it's dangerous. It's easy to say, okay, these people don't really know what they're doing. I got to say, they're doing the best that they can. There is a reason that there's there's GITA, the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance, because people are trying to do the best they can and make it work in a situation where it's not legal in some countries, right?
Yeah.
And
I love this. So we're not going to give you the tools to do this properly, and then we're going to judge you for not doing it properly.
We're going to judge you for not doing it properly. So, and among professionals, so especially among MDs, the idea that somebody's sort of practicing medicine in a way, I've got my quotes around that term.
Right. There's some ego stuff involved.
There's some ego stuff involved. And it's a little bit of a fear of like, wait, I studied for years and I did my residency and I did this and these people don't know anything, so there's that ego thing involved there. Yeah.
That totally,
and that also really adds to the bias. So there's a lot, it's really loaded. The Iboga, it's a very loaded thing.
There's politics involved.
Yeah, there's politics involved. And so
how, So Ken sort of knew how to structure some of this information and the way to submit it and perhaps who to submit it to in order to increase chances of...
Yes, yeah. And actually, so we ended up submitting it to the journal that Rick Doblin had suggested, actually, but only as our second choice. We went to another journal.
How many journals are there?
Oh, how many journals?
Yeah.
In the World Scientific Journals? Oh, man. Tens of thousands.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So if you submit, does reputation spread? If you get rejected from a couple of them, does it look bad?
I mean, there are some really good things about the scientific community, and one of them is that that kind of gossipy thing. It's very hard to kind of be blacklisted or even kind of brownlisted, if that might be an inappropriate term. So yeah, we sent it to another journal. They rejected it. The editor. The editorial assistant rejected it without even sending it to the editor. It was like, oh, we don't, this stuff doesn't work. We're not going to accept your paper.
Interesting.
That was in what they call a higher tier journal in a way, but it was the one that's people who are funded by NIDA, who are on the review board and who tend to publish in this. So National Institutes on Drug Abuse,
right?
People who are very well regarded in the field of addiction studies. We didn't even get a review. We didn't get a review of the article, basically. But at least they did it quickly. They gave us a stiff arm to the face,
right. Right.
And,
I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. And
I'd rather not get the girl's number and not have to wait to try to schedule a date.
Yeah, right.
And then have her flag
think about it. And then a month later they say no.
Yeah, just tell me to fuck off.
This is total crap. Right? Yeah. So we submitted it to the journal, which Rick Doblin had suggested, and that's the one we ended up getting accepted at. But we did 3 revisions, and the last revisions were very minor, but it was a long process. We first submitted in September of last year, and then we resubmitted in early January. And then had
resubmit. Did they ask you for more sources or something?
Yeah, well, not more sources. What they asked us for was to address certain things that they thought they had questions about some things. And they also said, you should address this, or you shouldn't be talking about this, or, and
then is there's a board of scientists reviewing.
Yeah, there were reviewers. So what happens when you submit an article to a journal, is they can accept it for review, which is what the second journal did. The first journal said, no, we're not going to review it.
Right.
Second journal said, okay, yes, we're going to accept it for review. And then at that point, what they'll do is they'll select, they have an editorial board or a review board, and they'll say, these people would be the best ones to review this article because they have some knowledge of this field in some way.
You get assigned to a group of people within that they have access to.
Yes, right. Okay. And they're people who have already agreed to be on their review board or on the editorial board. And sometimes the journal will say, do you have any suggestions for who you would like to review your paper? So back in 2012, when I was writing a review article on Ibogaine, they asked me who I wanted to have a review, and I said Ken Alper and a guy up at USC, a guy named Charlie Kaplan, and they reviewed it. They were the two reviewers on it. We got assigned to two reviewers who were blinded, and that's just typically how they do it. They don't tell you who's reviewing your paper, and they don't tell the reviewers who the authors are.
So couldn't you technically, like, if you knew these people, like, shoot them a text or slide a DM?
Yeah, that would be considered kind of like, in a way, it would be like tampering with a witness or obstruction of justice, through back channels, not to refer to anything that's going on politically right now.
Sure.
But it would not be appropriate. And it wouldn't be appropriate for me. It's like, so I'm on a couple different review boards for journals. And I found looking at somebody's article, even though the author's name is blinded, sometimes it's just, there aren't that many people writing about Ibogaine. So I can go, oh, I know who this is. But it would be really inappropriate for me to contact that person and say, hey, I'm reviewing your article.
Right.
It's got some weaknesses, so you've got to kind of play that game of...
People generally respect the honor system.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what I'm saying is one of the things that's a strength of the academic and the scientific system is that this peer review system really works well to a really great extent. And the biases that can get something tossed out that could be really worthwhile, that's a weakness. Obviously, if somebody is like, I don't understand this at all, it must be crap, they just reject it out of hand. Yeah. I think Einstein's paper on, was it the general relativity? It was the first one that got published. That was in 1906, I think. And I think he had some, like 5 rejections. Wow. By journals, and then finally one of them accepted it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go on too long of a side rant on this particular topic, but, I want to say, I was listening to a series of reports on NPR, last year that was saying, there's a lot of studies that we should be doing, but we aren't because we just can't get these kinds of things funded. So I guess that's a different world, right? The reviews, there's a lot more people getting stuff reviewed and published than being able to actually get a study funded. That's a whole different ballgame.
It's a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
Because the reviews are done by people who understand, who see the value in scientific research regardless of what we can sell with it. Whereas funding is going to come from some sort of monetary investments.
Right. Yeah. And the funding is, of course, it's going to precede everything else. If you don't have funding, well, you can do something. I guess you can find ways to do it without funding, but if you're independently wealthy or if you don't need to eat. So
eating stupid.
It's plain dumb.
So when did you? So continue. So you got you went through a couple of processes. You get published.
Right. Yeah, and finally got it accepted, and miraculously, and it was some nudging by Ken. He did actually contact the editor-in-chief. After we sent the 3rd revision in, we thought for sure they're going to accept this one, and we really wanted it. I really wanted it to be accepted before I spoke at the conference in April.
Right.
And so Ken actually did email. Well, he was in touch with the editor-in-chief anyway, because you send your things into the journal. The editor-in-chief sends him an email back saying, "Okay, we got it." And Ken at some point, emailed him and said, "Look, we've taken care of. The reviewers have said all these different things. They've enumerated over the course of this whole thing 56 different things they wanted us to take care of. We've addressed those and bullet pointed them, and we've taken care of all these things. And the reviewers even said this last time, they've answered every question we had. So please, could you just accept it at this point?" And the guy said yes. So So it was accepted on the Sunday before the conference. I was heading to the conference on Wednesday. So
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Right under the gun.
Yeah, right under the gun. Yeah, the New Zealand paper, which so there was a very similar study, which was actually modeled on the study that I did, which was done in New Zealand, and that one had already been accepted by the same journal.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And about 3 or 4 weeks before.
Okay.
So we knew that they'd been accepted. And this guy, Jeff Noller, was coming out from New Zealand for the conference, and he and I are going to be on the same panel. And he's got his article accepted, and we're still waiting. I'm sweating, on this one.
What's the name of the journal?
There. The American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And like, who funds the journal?
That's a good question. I don't know. Some journals you actually have to pay to get your article published in,
right.
and some of them are funded such that they don't have to do that. But I don't know who's backing that one.
What are journals normal? I mean, is there like a normal stream of income for journals?
That's something
typically?
I really don't know how to answer. I guess their revenue stream in part is coming from the library subscriptions. So, like UCSD, for example, has subscriptions to hundreds of
right.
academic journals, and they're paying a fee to have that journal in the library.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, you as a common citizen, you and I couldn't go in there from our laptop at home and log in and say, I want to see that paper, that was published in 2011 on this and that, because it's going to be blocked. But if you're at the university library and you're logged in on their system, then you have access to a lot more journals than you would ordinarily. And you could also go and any journals they have in hard print at the university, you can, of course, go and look at those.
Right.
So the university is paying a lot of money just to have those things available at the library. So that I know is a big source of income, but I don't know if it's the largest source of income for these journals or what.
Yeah.
So some of them I think are probably underwritten by government grants, yeah, so I'm not sure is really the answer.
Gotcha.
Ken would be able to tell you, though.
Yeah.
Let's call him up.
Yeah. Well, surprise, we have him here now. Yeah. So the conference.
Yes.
The conference was, by the way, let's flash back for just a second. There was another conference here in San Diego where you had a bunch of people staying with you.
That was the Harm Reduction Conference. Yeah.
What was that about?
Oh, man. Harm Reduction Coalition. So they're about harm reduction and drug use, and about studying harm reduction and best practices. So yeah, that was it happened to be in San Diego back in, I think it was November. And Claire Wilkins, who runs an Ibogaine treatment center in Mexico, came up for that conference, and Dana Beal, who's Yippie from activist from way back when, in the 60s, and who has been advocating for Ibogaine research since at least the mid 80s.
Right.
Organized a panel that was accepted at the harm reduction conference, and so he got me on the panel, he got Claire on the panel. So, and we had a couple other people who were just out for the conference who stayed at our place as well, including this Afghani guy who wants to start a clinic in Nepal, I think.
Oh, wow.
So interesting, kind of week for that. And we had our panel, which was pretty well attended, and, at this harm reduction conference.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's a good deal.
Did you reunite with any of those people at the MAPS conference?
Yes. Well, Claire was there. Claire, in fact, Claire Wilkins moderated the panel that I was on. It's just two people, me and Jeff Noller, a guy from New Zealand, and then Claire moderated.
Right.
And
let's go back to sort of like give the listeners a snapshot of the conference.
Right. Yeah.
How many years have you been?
This was the third time I've been.
Okay. And it's like, it's not annual. It's like every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, it's every 2 or 3 years. So the first one I went to was in 2010. I don't think they'd had one for some years before that. I don't know how long it had been.
Right. How many attendees at that one? Approximately.
Good question. I would say 800, 1,000. It's just a ballpark guess.
Right.
And then there was one in 2013. So 2010 in San Jose, 2013 in Oakland, and then 2017 in Oakland. So there have been the 3 conferences in that span. And this one was the largest one. And it's actually, they were billing it as, and I'm sure they're correct, largest psychedelics conference in history.
Right. How many people do you think were this one?
5,000.
Wow.
Hard to, and there was a lot of press, a lot of a lot of researchers, a lot of just conference attendees.
More mainstream press, I imagine.
Yeah, a lot of more mainstream press, and I
mean, CNN.com. I remember when it was like 2-3 years ago, they had a story where the headline was, "Is ayahuasca the next medical marijuana?"
Yeah.
And like prior to like 2 or 3 years ago, I'd say most people hadn't even heard of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, So, people have really come a long way in terms of their awareness of what's going on. But just to compare it to the 2013 conference, when I went to that one, it was still small enough. I would say it was around the same scale as the 2010 one.
Right.
And, maybe bigger, probably bigger, but not by a huge amount. But it was still small enough that the press corps that was there, had access to a great proportion of the researchers who were presenting. So I had people stopping me in the hallway saying, "Hey, we'd like to interview you. I'm from National Geographic. Can we interview you?" And so on. I'm from this Australian broadcasting company. Can I interview you? Didn't happen at all. Actually, there's one guy right after our panel, who's a filmmaker who interviewed me right afterwards, but he's the only person who grabbed me. But I think that's a function of the fact that there were so many people presenting this time.
Yeah.
You had so many people just that you could talk to, and it was not overwhelming, but it was
amazing.
So completely vibrant and alive. It was like a huge brain of psychedelic activity.
Right. No, I don't know if I'm pretty sure I've said this on this show before. Like I've always felt like the coming decade, we're going to see, it's really the coming decade are going to be about artificial intelligence and psychedelics.
Oh yeah.
I think that those two things are going to dramatically shift the way that we interact with reality for the next chapter of human civilization. And I think that's why you see that happening at Burning Man in this community. And there are direct ties because the same kinds of people that are out there on Playa experimenting with ideas about how to develop the next chapter of human civilization are the same people that are coming into positions of power. And, you have this generation of people who have the money, who have the economic power now to enable research and stir interest in psychedelics. Probably because a lot of them have also experienced important healing energies from psychedelics. So dude, this saves my life. Now I have money to throw at it. I'm going to make this thing bigger.
Yeah, I see that happening too. That's an encouraging thought, really, and has me thinking. I really hope that there's good hope actually that there's going to be this synergy where, as with the development of the personal computer and computing, with the way that psychedelics, as we know, were involved with that, with the people at the Palo Alto research, people in Palo Alto and people who developed, Steve Jobs and so on, who cited their psychedelic experiences as being formative. Yeah, I could see that happening with AI as well.
That used to be such a big deal that Steve Jobs did LSD.
Yeah, right.
And I think they even counted it. He only did it 3 times. It was just I'm certain he did more than 3 times.
Right. That they know of.
Right. It's like people when Bill Clinton was like, I didn't inhale.
Right. Yeah. Now it's like, I've been microdosing for the last 2 years.
Yeah. That's the big thing in Silicon Valley right now.
Yeah,
especially
microdosing. Yeah.
What? So in the conference, what's the energy like? How would you describe this event to somebody who's never been?
Wow. Man. it's so hippie researchers are getting together, and there's this energy of, people who know each other, who are getting to see each other for the first time in who knows how many months or years, who are, maybe they know each other from having done research together, or they've worked together before.
Or they've been following each other's work. They may have only met online. They may have only had Skype conversations, like the conversations I'd had with my colleague in New Zealand over the years, and I was looking forward to meeting him. So there's this immense social aspect to it. That is, there are people who are so excited just to be in the same place as each other. I get to see that person again, and I'm going to meet some other people who I haven't met yet, and who are going to be really, really stimulating and inspiring. And we're going to go to the party on Saturday night, and we're going to go dancing, and probably there's the bicycle day party. There's it's always right around April 20th, right? April 19th and 20th to celebrate Albert Hoffman's first bicycle ride.
Yes, yeah.
Where he discovered LSD.
And so, and it's interesting because you get into the talks, right? So the talks are kind of like the interior. They're like the inner city of the whole thing. And that's where people are really getting down to the scientific talk and the language that is going to be conveyed to the scientific and medical communities.
Right.
But surrounding all that is like the rest of the brain. So that's like the core of the processor, I guess. And then so you've got all this on the outside of that. You've got all the people at the marketplace who are, there might be people selling, like there are people selling, what's the stuff that's been recently used? Leaves from Thailand that are chewed, that have a little bit of an opiate in them. I'm forgetting the name of it right now.
And they're not illegal here yet?
They are still legal, actually. The DEA decided to put a moratorium on their Schedule 1 of this stuff, and why am I blanking on the name of it? And there are people who are, there are people who are, there's artwork, and there are people selling really cool clothing, and there's the symposia stage where people are talking about their psychedelic experiences, and so that's on the outside. And there are people who are in the hallways and meeting each other for the first time, and they're going to they're having lunch together, and they're going off to and having fun in the evenings together. So this is all on the soft, fuzzy outer shell of the whole thing, and it's this warm, inviting, fun, exciting thing and then you get into then there's the academic conference in the middle of that, which is, it's like the chewy center of the candy.
Yeah.
So,
and I imagine a contributing factor to the excitement is that constant awareness that just a few years ago, just something like this couldn't have been pulled off. Everybody would end up on a list somewhere. Now it's like governments have bigger fish to fry.
And that's a good point. There's this growing excitement, and I saw this in previous conferences as well. There's this growing excitement about the awareness that we're doing things that are helping to forward something that, if we weren't doing it, it wouldn't be happening. And we can see this growing, and we can see public awareness growing, and we can, for the most part, see public acceptance growing. Jeff Sessions accepted,
Because I imagine so many of the attendees have spent so much of their life like walking around with the weight of the stigma on their back that they're in this kind of field and this kind of work.
Yeah.
And now they can just be out and be open.
That's a really important thing. That's something that really, that you mention it reminds me of, you go to a Burning Man, or you go to a regional event, you feel like I can find finally among my people, and I can just be myself. Right. So that's huge actually. And I really hadn't considered it, but that's really a lot of the energy of the conference is just people feeling freed up, that they can just talk about what they want to talk about and just be with be who they want to be.
And they can tell stories and not feel judged.
Yeah,
Because I imagine there's a lot of people that have to like for lack of a better phrase, like put up the scientific front at all times in order to remain. Because there is more pressure when you're in this field. Yeah. There is more pressure to have a certain image because people are looking for any excuse to poke holes in what you're doing. Yeah,
you definitely wouldn't want to go up, and there's a huge danger of being seen as flaky or as just being another hippie, and like, okay, that person's been clearly their mind is gone because they've been doing too many drugs,
right.
And so there's that. And I think that people are of course well aware that that's how they're perceived by a lot of folks, and when you don't have to worry about that, it's very liberating.
Yeah. So tell me about the panel.
The panel, So Jeff Knoller and me and Claire Wilkins, and so we really wanted to, of course, talk about the results from our studies, and this was the first time. This is the first time that Jeff had been in the U.S. for one thing, but he's spoken about his research at other conferences. But we got to be there right after hearing that our papers were accepted, so we got to go up there and say, "So our papers have been accepted," and we got a lot of applause for that and everything. And it's this kind of crowning moment for both of us. And Jeff went first. I really wanted to talk about subjective experience. So once it was clear back in September, October, once we started submitting the article, and I thought, okay, what's next for me? Mm-hmm. And I had a chance to speak at a little conference. The Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness happened to be up I-5 in Encinitas last in March, I think it was.
Anthropology of Consciousness.
Yeah, a little fringe group in anthropology, and then there was the Wisconsin conference as well. And I thought, well, now that I'm done with the study and we're writing it up, what do I want to do? I can talk about other things than just the results of the study. Right. I realized that what I wanted to do was to explore the subjective side, what people's stories are, how are they being transformed by these substances and by the treatments. So I'd been kind of working that into my talks in Wisconsin, and then the one in March, and that's really where I wanted to go with the talk at the conference. And I told Jeff about this in one of our Skype conversations, and he said, "Okay, well, I'll go first, and I'll kind of lay the groundwork." Which at this point you don't really have to do a whole lot because people are much more aware of what Iboga is, what Ibogaine is.
So he goes through a basic description, and your studies. I imagine you said that his was modeled after yours, so you came to similar conclusions.
Yeah, and so the protocols are virtually identical, and so he was able to lay out the protocol pretty quickly and say, "Here are our results." And
are you able to get into any of that verbally, or do we need to read the paper?
Oh no, I can definitely get into that verbally.
What are some of the results that you both came to?
Well, the major thing is that we both are showing that the Ibogaine is good for two things. One is that it's really good for the detox. On the short term, it reduces your withdrawal symptoms so that you have a chance to stop using. And so it takes away the cravings and the withdrawal symptoms. But what we were measuring was the withdrawal symptoms. And we're showing that it's really effective for that. And the other thing is we're showing that it's effective in the long term. We both were doing follow-ups for 12 months after treatment. We're showing that it's effective in the long term for reducing, technical term, drug use severity. But, it's kind of obvious from the name of it what it is. But reduces the frequency of drug use, reduces the amount of substance you're using, but it also reduces your sense of being out of control. So
really?
And so
it gives you confidence as far as like navigating life.
Yes, it gives you confidence in navigating life. It gives you the sense that you have the choice of whether or not you're going to be using.
Oh wow!
And so even if you don't completely stop using, then you're not using nearly as much as you were, but you're able to move on with your life and and do other things.
What and I don't know if this number exists, but like, is there like a percentage, like a success rate?
It's interesting. Well, it's yes, and so our two studies were showing, in a way, we're showing different things in that regard. A major difference between the two studies. His study he had 14 people enrolled. We had 30. But we had more people enroll, but we had a much higher dropout rate from the study.
Right.
So we can only say with confidence what we've got from the people who are still in the study, right? And so our major assumption when we did the statistical analyses was that if you weren't in the study at a particular follow-up point, then you would relapse completely back to what we call baseline, so pre-treatment, in your drug use severity, in your family and social well-being, and your psychiatric status, and all those things. So
that's the assumption you made of the people that didn't respond?
Right. And so
kind of like if you're leaving the parking lot and you've lost your ticket, so they charge you the full amount for what the parking
exactly.
the entry fee was.
Yeah. And so, and we can talk about why this is, but in Jeff's study, there was a lot less of a dropout, which is great because he had only half as many people as we did in his study. But so he was able to say, I had, out of the 14 people, I think he had 12 people who he followed up with for pretty much the entire time. Whereas that's about how many I had as well.
And this is like years that you followed up with.
We followed them up with them for a year.
1 year. Okay.
So
I have a question. So what about how would you respond to people who look at like things like this and they say, well, it's a really small study, so it doesn't give us like the information that comes out of it is not as valuable as it would be if it was a larger study?
Oh, it's a fair criticism. But there's an easy response to that, and that is that in our statistical analyses, all these statistical analyses take into account the sample size. So it's more difficult in some ways to show significance in results if you have a smaller number of people in the study.
Right.
So the fact that we were able to show wildly significant improvements for people, even though we had this small sample size, and we were able to show these improvements even though we had a small number of people in the study,
right.
And we were making this conservative assumption that if we couldn't reach them at a particular follow-up point, then they were doing badly. And I know for a fact that there are some people who I wasn't able to follow up with at certain points who were doing quite well.
Right.
But to really make it as rigorous as possible and to really combat those kinds of criticisms. You just say, look, okay, we're going to assume that these people were doing really badly. And look, even though we assume that, we're still showing that there's huge improvement on the group level. And we also show that for individuals, there's great and sustained improvement. So I want to say that aside from those two things that I mentioned, so there's the fact that it's great for detox and that also reduces the drug use severity. We also looked at related sorts of problem areas. So our main measure was something called the Addiction Severity Index, which has 7 subscales on it. One of them is drug use severity. And that was the most, the way we looked at it that was our most important one, because that showed whether or not people were in control of their drug use and whether they were reducing their drug use, right?
Right.
But there's also alcohol use severity, and then these 5 other problem areas. There's psychiatric status, family and social status. That's like, how well are you getting along with people in your life that matter to you most? People in your family, people you work with, people who are your friends. And there's legal status. Like, do you feel like you're in trouble with the law? Are there any court cases currently pending and things like that? Medical status. So all these subscales. And what we're showing is that the family and social, the thing that they improve most in is actually the drug use severity. But they also are showing very significant improvements throughout the follow-up period in family and social well-being.
Right.
And so,
because all that stuff's connected.
It's all connected. Yeah. You stop using oxycodone every day. You stop lying about it to your family, your friends, and you become less passive aggressive.
because you're interacting with your family and your network more. You have less of a desire to go and get high because you have stronger connections with family and community. And keep bouncing back and forth.
And this is part of why that is included in the Addiction Severity Index. This is looking at kind of more globally at how well are you doing in your life, right? So with one of the things I argued in my talk at the conference was that in addition to the fact that, you stop using that heroin you've been on for 7 years, you're going to show improvements in other areas. You're going to show psychiatric improvement. You're going to show improvement in family and social well-being.
Right.
Well, there's also what is the iboga doing to you? How is that transforming you on a psychospiritual level? And
the subjectivity that you got into.
Yeah, and that's what I was arguing was that what people tell us about their experiences, showing us that subjective experience matters, that it makes a difference for them because they realize the value of people in their lives. They have these regrets about how they've been treating people in their lives. They realize how much they love these people and how much they want to come through for them. And they imagine what their lives would be like if they could stop using, or what their lives would be like if they continue on their current path. Yeah,
the last time you were on, you told the stories you were telling is that, like, for some people it wasn't very visual. They just said like colors, shapes.
Yeah.
Somebody else had this like detailed story of seeing their past, present, and future, and seeing that they were running drugs with their brother and ended up killing their brother.
Yes.
Fucking his brother's wife. Right. And him getting killed.
Otherwise, life was really good.
Yeah.
So
different people see and experience different things, but they come out of it with a fairly consistent lesson of, I want to change my life. I love myself and
live my life.
What are your thoughts on that?
On how it's
the subjectivity. Like what is it that you were sharing with? I mean, I imagine you were telling some of these stories. But
So I was telling some of these stories.
What's your opinion on what's happening?
I think people are having a sort of a conversion-like experience in many regards, that they're experiencing things, they're envisioning things that are very powerfully transformative, because they see that they want to change, and they're impactful experiences where they realize, I really want my life to be different than this. And also, it's not just a kind of cognitive thing, I guess. It's having this certainty that you can make your life, you can set yourself right. Some of it has to do with also, having a more of a classic kind of mystical experience where you might, one person, for example, said, I had this certainty that death is not the final thing, that there's some kind of continuity beyond death, and that I've always got people around me protecting me, and I have the certainty that it can all work out, and so that helps give people confidence and the inspiration to do what they need to do.
Right. In that way, it is very similar to the DMT experiences, because talk to 10 different people and they'll tell you 10 very different stories of what they saw on the other side. I feel like it feels like the people that it seems like the more you cross over to whatever that other reality is, the more you start to interact with intelligence. But a lot of times, like, people's first trips are usually just more like that ego disillusionment and a reminder, and they come back very much excited about being in a human body. But I've always, I'm my stories are very much anecdotal, but I always tell people it's kind of like if you imagine that your subconscious is an intricate plumbing system, you think that the clog that's holding you back from personal growth is like somewhere near the garbage disposal, but it's actually like way deep down in the plumbing where you haven't even looked. And the DMT will just like go down there and unclog this thing for you. They didn't even know. Yeah, it's Drano.
Suddenly you have total clarity.
It's spiritual Drano. You pour it down, and like every other person I talk to tells a different story of what they interacted with on the other side, what they experienced. Like my first trip was like, I'm a visual artist, and it was not at all visual. In fact, in general, psychedelics don't get like very visual for me. But like, it was just like this black abyss with what appeared to be infinite digits, like fingers. Yeah. And I just had this like absolute knowing that what I was looking at was every human soul on the planet. And it was very much like a hand. You know, I'm one of these fingers, but I'm still part of the hand. And then I talked to other people who described their first trip, and it's like this glorious, colorful, Disneyland of adventures and movements and machine elves. And I'm like, I've never seen any of that before. So it seems like it presents whatever it is. It presents itself to you in the best, in whatever way it can.
Yeah. There are some deeper level kinds of understandings that can be imparted, even if the way we see it is very different. It might taste like chocolate to me and taste like peanut butter crunch to you, but it's...
some people get a hug and then some people get a spanking.
Yeah. And actually, that's a really good analogy too, especially for people who are getting this kind of treatment for some kind of substance use, and they're going in with the intention of healing that. Sometimes they get the spanking and the hug, and sometimes they just get the spanking. And
does there seem to be...
Sometimes you just get the hug.
Yeah. Is there any predictor, or is it like completely random whether or not you're going to get a spanking or a hug?
I have no idea. And the experiences were so varied. So I actually tried to quantify this. Since I had some time after, we'd submitted the paper the second time, I thought, okay, I'll look at some of the data we have, because we had this one instrument that's called the States of Consciousness Questionnaire, where after the experience, people said, and it's a multiple choice sort of questionnaire, but it has 100 items, and I think only 43 of them are scored, but it's really going to try to measure whether or not you had a mystical experience. So there are all these different realms of mystical experiences, and each item will be something like, I experienced oneness with the entire universe, or I saw geometric shapes and of different sizes floating past, and then you rate it on a scale of 0 to 5, from 0 not at all to 5 being the most powerful experience of that sort I've ever had in my life. And so we had all these scores from people who had been in the study, and I went back and I went, well, is there some kind of correlation? Did the people who did well in the study also have really profound experiences? Can we correlate this? And I first ran this data. I just put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and I was like, well, there isn't any correlation, and in fact, there's sort of a tendency for people who didn't have strong experiences to have better follow-up scores with the drug use severity, but it wasn't significant. Right. But I'd sorted the data on this spreadsheet. I looked at it, and I had grouped people into two categories. One was the really profound experience category, and there were 12 out of the people I think there were 28 people who'd done this measure out of the 30. Right. So 12 who were in one group, and it was 10 and 18. 10 in the powerful experience group and 18 in the not so powerful experience group, and I had them sorted by their scores and the drug use severity. And I noticed something peculiar, which was that at the 1 month follow-up, which is where I was using the drug use severity scores to see if they changed significantly from one group compared to the other, that out of the 18 people who had the less intense experiences, 9 of them completed the 1 month follow-up. So half of them completed the 1 month follow-up. Right? Okay. Out of the 10 people who had the more profound experiences, 9 of them did the 1 month follow-up. 90% of them
Okay.
And if you do it with simple, what's called a chi-square analysis,
Right.
that's significant. Those two groups, it's significant. There's something going on there, statistically speaking. We can say that the people who had the more profound experiences were more likely to do the 1 month follow-up. So I thought, I'm going to do this thing where I make that conservative assumption that people who didn't do the 1 month follow-up went back to baseline on the drug use severity. So you've got these pre-treatment scores for everybody.
Yeah.
And 1 month follow-up scores for only 9 of the 18 people in the one group and 9 of the 10 people in the other group. You hit the blank ones where you don't have the follow-up scores, and you insert their baseline score, which is going to be typically a lot higher, and it's going to be worse. That is, the severity score is higher, which means they're doing worse. So you plug those baseline scores in the 1 month follow-up. Then you do the comparison again. Are the people who had the intense experiences doing better at 1 month? And if you say that the people who didn't follow up are doing worse, then so there are a couple main things that could be going on here. One is people who had the profound experiences are in fact doing better, and so the people who aren't doing as well don't want to talk to me because they're relapsing and they're just not doing very well.
Right. Because when you're excited about things like this, like, you won't shut up about it.
Yeah. And so another thing, and the other thing I think is that people who had the profound experiences, I think that they had the sense, this stuff worked. And I had a few people who didn't have profound experiences saying, I didn't really get a whole lot out of it, and I suspect that that people who had the more profound experiences really thought, that stuff did something to me. I feel changed. And, subjectively, that's they're experiencing. And if that's their subjective reality, that's really true for them. They're a different person. They've got a different perspective on things.
Yeah.
But I think the people who didn't have those experiences might have thought, okay, well, it didn't work. I was a waste of my time and money going down there or to Mexico for this treatment. And,
God, it must be crushing.
Yeah, but I think that some of the people in that group, and I know actually for a fact that some of the people who I didn't get hold of at 1 month were actually doing pretty well, but they just didn't respond to me at 1 month, but they were doing pretty well. But I think there is, at the same time, I think there is something to that, people probably weren't doing as well on the whole.
Right.
And also the people who had those strong experiences were much more excited about this medicine.
Right.
And we're much
getting,
more about it.
Perhaps inching a little bit closer or being reminded of a sense of purpose, a place in this universe. That's always going to be the thing that really does motivate people to pull themselves out of a rut. That's kind of a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. I think when you see the immensity, and I haven't done a strong dose of iboga or ibogaine yet. I've had some smaller doses, but just based on what people are telling me about their experiences, and also based on my experiences with other profound substances, I think, when you experience that, the immensity of the universe and all that's possible, and you see this in a flash of insight, see how small your normal operating has been. And, if you've been using oxycodone and you've been, in this really confined space, in this psychological prison, you see how small you've been living. It's like, wow, I could be doing so. I could be out there rather than in this little tiny, capsule. Yeah.
That's amazing. So sort of like, did you get any new insight from the conference? Things you're excited about?
I was really jazzed to see all these people that I hadn't seen for a while, and some people who I'd seen recently. Oh man. I think in terms of the the research and my thinking about psychedelics, I don't think I had anything really like, wow, that was a eureka moment.
Right. It sounds like it was my third burn.
Yeah, in a way, but also
really
it was like, as if your third burn though was, you might not have gotten these huge downloads and insights, but you
reaffirmed.
Really, you reaffirmed, and also you felt more connected with people there than you ever had before. Yeah. And that's really what I came away with was feeling more and more connected. It was tough coming back actually, because then I was like, okay, I'm back at my regular job. I gotta get up and go do this, and it was kind of like, in a way, like coming back from the burn. I don't get to go up. I don't get to see those people today.
Yeah,
and,
the post-MAPS blues.
Post-MAPS blues. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts or insight on where the psychedelic community is going next, and if it would at all be surprising to people? Or is it just kind of moving in the direction that we assume it would be, which is little by little more funded studies, more out in the open?
I think that it's going to accelerate, and there's already this momentum where things are building up, and it's kind of going faster and faster, like we're moving towards some kind of singularity in a way, right? But I think there are going to be some big leaps forward when things so what's on the horizon that we can be pretty sure is going to happen by around 2021 or so, and maybe shortly thereafter, MDMA is going to be an available prescription medication. It's going to be something that can be used in therapy. The FDA and NIDA are going to say, yes, you can use this stuff. Right. It's not Schedule I anymore. And that is going to have... It's going to be like an earthquake in the psychedelics research world, and also just in medical science at large. And I think that's going to... We have these little explosions going on, like the Griffiths group at Johns Hopkins publishes the paper on psilocybin and mystical experiences, or people publish about smoking cessation, or reducing end-of-life anxiety with psilocybin. And these are these explosions. People start becoming more aware of what's going on, and this is legitimizing it. I think once MDMA is completely legitimized, and they're going to be starting phase 3 clinical trials within the next year, and it's going to lead to this being a therapy that is available to people widely. Right. Once that happens, it's going to just tear the whole thing open. I think it's going to open the floodgates. Yeah.
It's 2018 to 2021 is the expected.
I think so. I think 2021, and they've got the whole thing. Pardon the pun, but they've got it all mapped out in terms of when things are likely to happen. Right, they've got, I think, 14 different clinical 3 study sites. And
does it? I mean, because it kind of feels like we're in a bit of a race, because there is this whole other side of the population that would like for all of this stuff to just disappear and be illegal immediately. Yeah. I mean, because we're living this very strange time. We're in California where cannabis is now legal. And yet there's still these federal legal clashes, and because you can sell cannabis, but banks can't hold money for a cannabis business, I think.
Oh yeah,
there's some weird.
Right.
Just even today at this lunch that I was talking about earlier that I was having with my brother, we happened to be on Park Boulevard where I was dropping off my phone to get repaired. And we go to get and as I'm dropping off my phone, right next to me, a police raid starts to happen of a marijuana delivery business that was right next door to the cell phone repair place. And so this is there's these all of a sudden a bunch of black cars pull up, and cops in vests, and they're just they're pouring in there, and I'm kind of watching this and I'm like, God, Like it's amazing. Like these are the stories we'll be telling. Someday our children's generation will be looking at like, you guys threw people in jail for this? Are you fucking kidding me?
Really? Yeah.
And meanwhile, we're having this lunch, and like one of the topics of conversation that my brother's like very vanilla.
Yeah.
But like one of the topics of conversation that we were having is his son is autistic, and he has now developed a curiosity about CBD oil, the non psychoactive cannabis that they're finding more and more people. The stories are starting to now get around about how this is like helping kids with autism and like the pain that they're feeling and the temper tantrums and all these kind of things.
Yeah.
So we are living in a weird fucking time.
Ooh, sure. Yeah,
2021. I mean, that prediction for sure makes a lot of sense. But it's also it's not like the raves are going to stop. There's still going to be 19-year-olds dropping ecstasy and going to hear progressive house music.
Yeah, yeah.
And then at the same time, it's going to be sold over the counter as
yeah.
Or
and
not
there
over
will
the
still
counter,
be people who will want to
prescription.
have this, who will want to stop the progress, who will want to turn back the clock, and
right.
But I really get the sense, and this is something that was at the conference. We feel like we're winning, and how long ago was it? So I think it was actually on an Oprah Winfrey show where she had presented this. There was a research study that was published, and it turns out it was a fraud, that this person had put
Oprah?
pictures in their research study that were faked. They were supposedly showing holes in the brain created by MDMA, but it wasn't MDMA. I think it was methamphetamine.
Oh yeah.
High doses.
That's what that was what the main study that he ordered like the wrong thing supposedly, and like to this day when all these news outlets and journals have tried to interview him, he just wouldn't respond. Like I wonder if he was responding to pressure to put out a certain kind of study and come to certain kind of conclusions, and now he doesn't want to talk about it.
I suspect so, and and so they stuck by that. Rick Doblin actually is he really led the response to that, and poking holes in that thing, so to speak. But you can't. It's much harder to do that now. And not only did we end up kind of steamrolling that eventually, but that had a lot of cachet for years.
Yeah,
and people would, and you might even still find some reporters citing that research study, but it's not. That doesn't happen very much anymore because we've kind of squashed it.
Right.
And now we've got so much momentum. That something like that is just like a little speck on the windshield. We can just wipe it away.
Yeah. That's the approach, right? To have as much momentum as possible. I mean, for all the fake news and bullshit that the internet has given us, has given us the total flip side of it, which is like this community. We can fact check information. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's this quote, John Ecklerman. Are you familiar with this? Like, it was a quote. This is a writer who was writing a book about Nixon administration, and he got this quote from like his aide, who he didn't use it apparently in the book originally, but he released the quote like in the past year, where he says, I'll read it. It says,
this Ehrlichman?
I'm sorry, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. It says, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about drugs? Of course we did.
Oh, that's a brilliant quote. Oh man, he was press secretary under Nixon, right? Yeah,
right.
Oh,
and I guess it'll be a little harder to do that now.
Yeah, it is.
Too many news sources, too many communities, too much connection.
We actually have a really good context for comparison right now,
right?
With Trump and with Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General.
Right. And
he's trying to do those things, and I really just think the tide is too strong at this point. You'll have these raids, like the one you saw today, and and people are scared, and there are good reasons to be scared, but it's just not so simple to. It's still, unfortunately, I think it's still kind of easy to do the race baiting sort of thing, or the kind of connecting African Americans with drugs, or it's difficult to deal with that sort of thing. But I still think that the momentum and just the overwhelming numbers that we have now, people who are awakened and go, nah, it's bullshit.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that stuff anymore,
Ideally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a scary time.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But we'll see what happens next.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we might see what what's the lowest approval rating that Trump will drop to? Then that might be the kind of your bare bottom minimum for, there's always going to be a certain percentage of the population that you won't be able to win over.
Right. Yeah, because, it's, and, that's obviously a topic of conversation that comes up quite a bit in our social circles. And it's yes, Trump could try to push through, all kinds of legal challenges for our side. However, even if he was to get impeached and possibly removed, because impeachment's not removal, by the way.
Right.
It's just basically a censure. You still have other politicians that are going to take space. And even if they are just absolute pieces of shit of human beings who are trying to stop every kind of progress possible, politicians are still beholden to voter bases. So
yeah.
At some point, you're going to piss off enough people. Ideally, we don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
I spent the first 2/3 of my life in a lot of depression and anxiety, and suicide was an option on the table. These days, I very much I'm looking at this movie called Reality, and I just want to know how it ends. I'm sticking around.
You and me both. I definitely had a lot of that going on in my younger years as well. And just. In part due to psychedelics, it's just not a real problem anymore. But what does scare me now is the electoral map. The electoral map, is so tilted in favor of the conservative team.
Yeah,
right now
because they keep voting.
Yeah, they keep voting and
I mean, all the lefties we're great at protesting, but we won't show up to the fucking voting booth.
Yeah, there's that, and we're also concentrated in these urban areas and on the coasts for the most part. And I mean, it's great being here in California, but we couldn't win the electoral college all by ourselves. So,
We might need to just go ahead and break off.
Yeah,
start our own country.
Yeah, we got the entire West Coast now. We got Washington and Oregon.
Cool. Yeah. Kingsley, thank you so much for coming on.
You're so welcome.
I love this conversation. This is totally wonderful.
Same here. I loved it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're going to continue on this journey and your research, and let's get you back on next year to see what's happening in the next chapter.
All right. Well, let's do it. Yeah. Thanks, Arash.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can connect with me on all things social medias at Mr. Arash. That's spelled MRARASH. I'm most active on Facebook-ish and Instagram-ish. But yeah, that's Mr. Arash on all the things. And if you're just trying to get a hold of us, you can always go to burnerpodcast.com and send a message through the contact form over there, and somebody from the team will check the messages and get back to you. You can tweet me, and you can tweet us, and you can message. Anyway, we're not hard to find. burnerpodcast.com. All the links are on there. Follow Burner Podcast on Facebook and stay up to date on all things Burner Podcast. Burner Podcast is released on the first and third Wednesday of the month and is available on Stitcher, iTunes, Spreaker, iHeart Radio, and TuneIn Radio, among others. The show is not hard to find. Make sure to also tune in to Burner Podcast Presents Alkaline if you want to hear DJ mixes by those active in the Burner community. And of course, Into the Fire, hosted by Super Suze, that's out of the Bay Area. This episode was produced by me, Me, I did it all by my lonesome. With support from our amazing team, which include associate producer Tori Massey, network music editor Navjit Sarna, chief playa scientist Ramiro Martinez, and a bunch of other people that would run out of time if I was just listening over here. We thank you, dear listeners, for all of your support. You are amazing, and we love you. And our opening theme music is America's Horse with No Name remix, produced by Joman. Check out his music over at soundcloud.com/DJ Joman. So until next time, love and light and all that other crap. Good night.